The smell hits him before anything else. Sweet. Wrong. The kind of smell that tells a trained nose that tissue is dying. Captain Thomas Callahan stands in a field hospital in Western Germany, 3 o'clock in the morning, April 1945. The war is almost over. But in this room, under the flickering light of oil lamps, another war is being fought. A war between life and death. A war that Thomas has fought 1,000 times before. The girl on the examination table is maybe 19 years old. She wears the torn gray-blue uniform of a Luftwaffe auxiliary. Her hands are shaking so hard she has to grip the edge of the metal surface just to stay upright. And her left arm is wrapped in makeshift bandages that have turned brown and yellow with dried fluid. Thomas has seen infected wounds before, thousands of them. He has seen men lose arms, lose legs, lose their lives to infections that spread faster than medicine could stop them. But something about this case is different, something about this girl. She keeps whispering in broken English that she is fine, that the wounds are fine, that she just needs rest and food. But when Thomas begins to unwrap the layers of fabric around her forearm, the fabric sticks, and when he pulls gently, she gasps and her face goes white. What he finds underneath is not just an injury, it is an infection spreading so fast that without immediate intervention, she will lose the arm by morning. Thomas looks at the bone saw on the instrument tray. Then he looks at the girl. Then he closes his eyes and sees two faces that have haunted him for almost a year. One is his brother Daniel. The other is a German boy named Klaus. One he could not save. One he chose not to save. And now standing over this German girl with her dying arm and her terrified eyes, Thomas Callahan must decide which ghost he will become. To understand how these two enemies ended up in this moment, we need to go back 10 months. To a beach in Normandy. To the day Thomas Callahan made a promise he has been trying to keep ever since. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach. The sand is red with blood, the air is thick with smoke and screaming, and the endless thunder of artillery. Bodies lie scattered across the beach like broken dolls, American and German, alike their uniforms indistinguishable under layers of mud and gore. Captain Thomas Callahan, 34 years old surgeon from Scranton, Pennsylvania, is trying to save his brother's life. Private Daniel Callahan, 22 years old, lies on a stretcher with a shrapnel wound through his abdomen. The metal fragment entered just below his ribs and exited through his back, tearing through intestines and liver and everything in between. Thomas knows with the clinical certainty of a decade of medical training that this wound is fatal. There is nothing he can do. There is nothing anyone can do. But he cannot stop trying. He presses gauze against the wound, watching it turn red in seconds. He calls for more bandage, more morphine, more time. But time is the one thing the battlefield does not give. Daniel reaches up and grabs his brother's wrist. His grip is weak, barely more than a flutter, but it stops Thomas cold. Tommy. Daniel's voice is a whisper, almost lost in the chaos around them. Tommy, stop. Thomas shakes his head. He keeps pressing. He keeps fighting. He has been fighting since the boats hit the beach, since the ramps dropped, and the bullets started flying, since he watched men he had trained with for 2 years die in the first 30 seconds of the assault. He will not stop now, not for anyone, not even for Daniel. But Daniel squeezes his wrist again harder this time and says the words that will change everything. Promise me something. Thomas looks at his brother, really looks at him, and he sees what he has been refusing to see. The gray pallor of the skin, the unfocused eyes, the blood pooling beneath the stretcher faster than any human body can replace. Daniel is dying, and there is nothing Thomas can do to stop it. What do you want me to promise? Daniel coughs. Blood flecks his lips. When the words come, they come slowly, each one a struggle. When I am gone, do not let this war make you into a monster. Do not let hatred win. Save the ones you can save. All of them, even the enemy. Thomas does not answer. He cannot answer. His throat is closed and his eyes are burning, and his hands are still pressing gauze against a wound that will not stop bleeding. Daniel smiles. It is a sad smile, the smile of a man who knows he is asking for something impossible. You are the best doctor I know, Tommy, but you cannot save everyone. So save the ones you can. And remember that every man bleeding on this beach on both sides has someone who loves him, someone who is waiting for him to come home. Thomas shakes his head. He wants to argue. He wants to tell Daniel that the Germans are different, that they started this war, that they deserve whatever happens to them, but the words will not come, because he knows deep down that Daniel is right. Promise me, Tommy, please. And Thomas, with tears streaming down his face and his brother's blood on his hands, makes the promise. I promise. Daniel Callahan dies at 2:47 in the afternoon on June 6, 1944. He dies on Omaha Beach in his brother's arms with the sound of gunfire fading into silence around them. Thomas holds him for a long time. Too long. Long enough that a medic has to physically pull him away, telling him there are other wounded, other men who can still be saved. Thomas nods. He wipes his eyes. He stands up and goes back to work. But something inside him has broken. Something that will not be fixed for a long, long time. 2 months later, Thomas breaks his promise. It happens at a field hospital in France, somewhere between the beaches of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes. The Americans are pushing east, liberating towns and taking prisoners, and the hospitals are overflowing with wounded from both sides. Thomas has been working for 20 hours straight. His hands are steady, but his mind is not. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees Daniel. Every time he hears a man scream in pain, he hears his brother's voice asking him to promise. And then the military police bring in a German prisoner. The prisoner is young, 18, maybe 19. He has blonde hair and blue eyes and a bullet wound in his leg. The wound is not severe. With proper treatment, he will survive. He will heal. He will walk again. But Thomas looks at the German uniform and sees the enemy. He sees the machine guns on Omaha Beach. He sees the artillery that killed his friends. He sees the shrapnel that tore through Daniel's body. And he makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Put him at the end of the line. The nurse looks at him with confusion. Captain, his wound needs treatment now. If we wait, it could become infected. Thomas does not look at her. He keeps his eyes on the next patient, an American sergeant with burns across his chest. I said put him at the end of the line. We treat our own first. The nurse hesitates. Then she nods and whirls the German prisoner away. His name was Klaus. Thomas never learned his last name. He never learned where Klaus came from, or who was waiting for him back home, or what he dreamed about before the war turned him into a soldier. All Thomas knows is that Klaus died the next morning. The infection spread overnight faster than anyone expected, and by the time the surgeons got to him, it was too late. He died alone in a corner of the hospital, surrounded by enemies who had decided he was not worth saving. Thomas did not perform the surgery. He was already on to the next patient, the next crisis, the next life that needed saving. He did not find out about Klaus until 3 days later when a nurse mentioned it in passing. That German boy from last week, the one with the leg wound, he died. Thomas nodded. He said nothing. He went back to work. But that night, lying in his cot and staring at the canvas ceiling, he heard Daniel's voice in his head. Save the ones you can save. All of them, even the enemy, and he knew he had broken his promise. Now we return to April 1945, to the field hospital near Kassel, Germany, to the German girl with the infected arm and the terrified eyes. Her name is Ingrid Hoffmann. She is 19 years old, born in Stuttgart in 1926. Her father was a school teacher who died in an Allied bombing raid in 1943. Her mother is a watchmaker's daughter who may or may not still be alive. Ingrid did not want to fight in this war. She wanted to become a teacher like her father. She wanted to stand in front of a classroom and watch children learn to read and write and think for themselves. But the war had other plans. After her father died, her family needed money, and the Third Reich needed women. So Ingrid joined the Luftwaffe Auxiliary not out of patriotism or hatred, but out of desperation. She was assigned to an anti-aircraft unit near Kassel, operating the radio, transmitting coordinates to the gun crews. She never saw the plane she helped shoot down. She never met the pilots who died because of the number she transmitted. She just did her job day after day because that was what she was told to do. But she knows. She knows that blood is on her hands. She knows that somewhere in America, mothers are grieving for sons who will never come home because of coordinates she transmitted. And she knows that if the Americans ever find out what she did, they will not show her any mercy. When the American advance reached Kassel in early April, Ingrid's unit was ordered to retreat, but the convoy never arrived, so they walked. 23 women, 3 officers, no medical supplies. They walked for 3 days through the Hessian countryside, staying off roads, hiding during the day. On the third day, an American patrol spotted them near a farmhouse. The officers told the women to scatter. Ingrid ran into a barn. That is when the mortar shell hit. She does not remember the explosion, just waking up on the ground with her ears ringing and blood running down her arm. A piece of shrapnel had gone through her forearm all the way to the bone. Another girl found her, Eva Lindner, a radar operator who was hiding in the same barn. Eva tore up her own undershirt and wrapped the wound as tightly as she could. Then they kept walking. They walked for 2 more days. No food, no water except what they could drink from streams. Ingrid's arm hurt, but she did not look at it. She was too afraid of what she would see. When they were finally captured by American troops near a river crossing, Ingrid had not changed the bandage once. She had just kept it wrapped and kept walking because stopping meant dying. Now she is sitting on an examination table in an American field hospital, and a surgeon named Thomas Callahan is looking at her arm with an expression she cannot read. She thinks he is going to let her die. She thinks he is going to look at her German uniform and see an enemy, not a patient. She thinks she is going to lose her arm, or her life, or both. But Thomas is thinking about something else entirely. He is thinking about Daniel, about Klaus, about the promise he made and the promise he broke. He is thinking about the choice he has to make right now in this moment, with this girl's life hanging in the balance. And he is thinking about the metal fragments he just pulled from her wound. 2 of them. One from an American artillery shell, 155 millimeters from a unit supporting the 1st Infantry Division. The big red one. The men who bled on Omaha Beach. Daniel's division. The other fragment is from an electronic device. A radio. The kind of communication equipment used to transmit coordinates for anti-aircraft systems. Thomas knows what this means. He knows that Ingrid was not just a passive auxiliary. She was part of the system that shot down American planes. She may have transmitted coordinates that killed American pilots. She may have helped kill men from Daniel's division. And now she is lying on his table with an infection that will kill her if he does not act, and he has to decide whether she is worth saving. The door opens. Major Harold Whitmore walks in. Whitmore is 42 years old, born in Boston, educated at Harvard Law. He has silver hair cut short in military style and gray eyes that seem to look through people rather than at them. He is an intelligence officer with G2, specializing in prisoner interrogation. He also lost his nephew in an ambush 3 weeks ago. An ambush that happened because of bad intelligence from a German prisoner who lied. Since then, Whitmore has believed that every German prisoner is a potential threat, not because he is cruel, but because he has seen the cost of trusting the enemy. When he heard that a female Luftwaffe prisoner, a radio operator, had been brought to the hospital, he saw an opportunity. Anti-aircraft units have information about German defense systems. If this girl knows something, he needs to extract it immediately. He looks at Ingrid, then at Thomas, then back at Ingrid. Is this the new Luftwaffe prisoner? Thomas steps between Whitmore and the examination table. She is my patient major. She is a radio operator from an anti-aircraft unit near Kassel. She may have information about German defense systems. I need to interrogate her now. Thomas feels his jaw tighten. She has an infection that is spreading. If I do not treat it in the next few hours, she will lose her arm or her life. Do you want to interrogate a corpse? Whitmore does not flinch. The Geneva Convention requires that prisoners receive medical treatment. It does not require that treatment be immediate or performed by the best surgeon available. Stabilize her, give me 20 minutes for interrogation, then do whatever you need to do. Thomas feels the anger rising in his chest. He thinks about Klaus, about the German boy he put at the end of the line because it was convenient, because he was tired, because he did not want to waste resources on an enemy. This time will be different. No. The Geneva Convention requires that prisoners be treated like our own wounded. If this were an American soldier, I would not stop in the middle of treatment so someone could ask him about tactics. The answer is no. Whitmore smiles. It is a cold smile without warmth. Captain Callahan, I will remember this conversation. When she is stable, I will be back. And next time you will not be able to stand in my way. He turns to leave but pauses at the door. Oh, and Captain, I have read your file. Normandy, your brother, and what happened in France afterward. Are you sure you want to stake your reputation on a German girl? The door closes behind him. Thomas stands very still for a long moment. Then he turns back to Ingrid and picks up his instruments. Margaret Collins, the surgical nurse who has worked with Thomas since North Africa, watches the whole exchange from the corner of the room. She is 28 years old from Columbus, Ohio. She has been in the Army Nurse Corps since 1941. She has seen more death and suffering than most people see in a lifetime. She is also the only person who knows about Klaus. She never said anything. She never confronted Thomas or reported him or even mentioned it in passing. But she has watched him ever since that day in France, every time a German prisoner comes through the hospital doors. She has watched him struggle with what he did, and she has wondered every single time whether he would make the same choice again. Now looking at the German girl on the table and the expression on Thomas's face, she thinks she knows the answer. This is his second chance. The surgery takes 40 minutes. Debridement, cleaning out the infected tissue, cutting away the dead flesh and exposing the healthy red muscle underneath. There is no anesthesia available for prisoners of war unless the surgery is life-threatening. Technically, this does not qualify. Yet, that means Ingrid is awake for the entire procedure. Thomas works quickly. His hands are steady even though his mind is not. He cuts away the gray-black tissue, drains the abscesses, scrapes out the dead material. Every time he does, Ingrid jerks her whole body going rigid and tears stream down her face. Margaret keeps one hand on Ingrid's shoulder, not restraining her, just grounding her, reminding her she is not alone. At one point, Ingrid starts to hyperventilate. Margaret talks her through it in broken German. Breathe slow, breathe deep. You are doing so well. Just a little more. When Thomas finally steps back, the wound is clean. The edges are raw and bleeding, but there is no more pus, no more gray tissue. He packs the wound with sulfa powder layers on fresh gauze and wraps it tightly with clean bandages. Then he looks at Ingrid and says words that Margaret will remember for the rest of her life. You did it. The worst part is over. Ingrid does not respond. She just sits there, pale and wet, with tears staring at her bandaged arm, like she cannot believe it is still attached to her body. Later that night, after Ingrid has been moved to the prisoner ward, Thomas sits alone in the small office that serves as his workspace. He holds the two metal fragments in his hand, turning them over and over. The artillery shell fragment, 1st Infantry Division, Daniel's Division, the radio fragment, communication equipment, the kind used to transmit coordinates for anti-aircraft systems. He knows what this means. He knows that Ingrid may have helped kill American soldiers. She may have transmitted coordinates that brought down planes. She may have blood on her hands. But he also knows something else. Everyone in this war has blood on their hands. The pilots who dropped bombs on Stuttgart, the artillery crews who fired shells into German positions, Thomas himself who has amputated limbs and cauterized wounds and watched men die on his table despite everything he did to save them. There are no innocents in war, only survivors and the dead. He puts the fragments in his pocket and goes to check on his patient. The fever starts at midnight. It spikes fast. By 2 in the morning, Ingrid is burning up her skin, slick with sweat, mumbling in German, half-conscious. Margaret wakes Thomas and he comes to the prisoner ward still in his undershirt, his hair sticking up. He checks the wound. The bandages are clean, no new drainage, but the skin around the wound is warm again, and the red streaks that had started to fade are now darker and longer. This is not the original infection. This is something new, something that got into her bloodstream during the procedure or was already there and is now spreading faster than the sulfa can stop it. Thomas has a decision to make. If the infection is in her blood, the only way to stop it is amputation. Cut off the arm, cut off the source, and hope the sepsis does not kill her anyway. But there is no guarantee that amputation will save her. And if he is wrong, he will have taken her arm for nothing. On the other hand, if he waits and the infection spreads, she will die within days. He asks Margaret what she thinks. Margaret looks at Ingrid, who is barely conscious, and says, "If it were my arm, I would want you to try everything else first." Thomas nods. He will try everything else. But in his head, another voice speaks. The voice of anger, of loss, of Klaus. She does not deserve this. She helped kill our people. Let her die. It is justice. Thomas stands between two decisions, between his promise to Daniel and his hatred of the enemy. 3 o'clock in the morning. The oil lamps flicker, and the bone saw sits within reach. He thinks about Klaus, about the boy he let die because he decided a German life was not worth saving. He thinks about Daniel. about the promise on the beach. Save the ones you can save. All of them. Even the enemy. He thinks about Ingrid, about the terrified 19-year-old who did not choose this war any more than Daniel did, and he makes his choice. He starts Ingrid on intravenous fluids to keep her hydrated and flush her system. He doubles the sulfa dosage, packing the wound again and giving her oral tablets. He keeps her on her back with her arm elevated to reduce swelling, and he watches, every hour, checking her temperature, her pulse, her wound. For the next 6 hours, nothing changes. The fever stays high, the infection stays active, and Ingrid drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling her mother's name, sometimes crying without sound. Then just before dawn, something shifts. Ingrid's fever breaks. Her temperature drops 2 degrees in an hour. By the time the sun comes up, she is awake and asking for water. Thomas unwraps the bandages and the wound looks better. The redness has stopped spreading. The skin feels cooler. The infection has not disappeared, but it has stopped advancing. Ingrid is going to keep her arm. When Thomas tells her, she does not smile or thank him. She just closes her eyes and whispers 3 words that echo in the silence of the hospital ward. I thought I was going to die. Thomas looks at her for a long moment. Then he says something that surprises even himself. So did I, but I made a promise to someone a long time ago, and I am not going to break it again. He does not explain what he means. He does not tell her about Daniel or Klaus or the guilt that has been eating him alive for almost a year. But Margaret, standing in the doorway, understands. This is his redemption. This is his second chance, and this time he did not let it slip away. The morning light filters through the dirty windows of the field hospital, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Ingrid Hoffman lies on a cot in the prisoner ward, her bandaged arm resting on her chest, staring at the ceiling with eyes that have seen too much. She has been awake for 3 hours now. The fever broke just before dawn, and with it came a clarity she did not expect. A clarity that forces her to confront something she has been avoiding since the moment she was captured. She knows what the American surgeon found in her wound. She saw his face when he pulled out the metal fragments. She saw the way his expression changed, the way his jaw tightened, the way he looked at her uniform with new eyes. He knows she was not just a passive auxiliary. He knows she was part of the machine that killed his countrymen. And yet he saved her anyway. Ingrid does not understand this. She has spent 3 years living under a regime that taught her that Americans were barbarians, that they would rape and murder any German woman they captured, that surrender was worse than death. She expected cruelty. She expected revenge. She did not expect a surgeon who stayed up all night fighting to save her arm. She did not expect kindness. The prisoner ward is a section of the hospital separated by canvas curtains and guarded by a single military police officer. There are 6 other prisoners here, all men, all German soldiers with injuries ranging from broken bones to gunshot wounds. They do not speak to Ingrid. They barely look at her. In their eyes, she is not a comrade. She is a woman who put on a uniform and pretended to be a soldier, and now she is taking resources that should go to real fighting men. One of them, a corporal named Werner Dietrich, has made his feelings particularly clear. Dietrich is 35 years old with a broken leg from a Jeep accident during his unit's retreat. He served in the 12th Panzer Division, fighting from Poland to France to Germany. He has seen things that would break most men, and he has survived by holding on to a simple belief: German soldiers do not surrender. German soldiers do not cooperate, and German soldiers certainly do not accept charity from the enemy. Every time the American nurse comes to check on Ingrid, Dietrich mutters something under his breath. Sometimes it is loud enough for everyone to hear. Why does she get clean bandages every day when mine are changed once a week? If we lost the war, it is because we let women pretend to be soldiers. She is a traitor. I heard she gave information to the Americans. Ingrid ignores him. She has no energy for anger. She has no energy for anything except lying here and wondering why she is still alive. But she knows that sooner or later she will have to face the truth about what she did during the war, the truth about the blood on her hands, the truth that the American surgeon already suspects. And she knows that when that moment comes, she will not hide from it. Captain Thomas Callahan has not slept in 36 hours. He sits in his small office, the 2 metal fragments laid out on the desk in front of him, and tries to make sense of what he is feeling. He saved her. He made the right choice. He kept his promise to Daniel. So why does he feel like he is drowning? The artillery shell fragment stares up at him. 155 millimeters, from a unit supporting the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, the same division that bled on Omaha Beach, the same division where Daniel served before being transferred to the Medical Corps. Thomas does not know if this specific shell killed anyone. He does not know if Ingrid transmitted the coordinates that guided it to its target. He does not know anything for certain. But he knows enough. He knows that Ingrid was part of an anti-aircraft unit. He knows that anti-aircraft units shot down American planes. He knows that every plane that went down meant 10 men dead, 10 families destroyed, 10 empty chairs at dinner tables across America. And he knows that he just spent all night saving the life of someone who may have helped kill those men. The door opens. Margaret Collins steps inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. She sets one on the desk in front of Thomas and sits down across from him. "You look terrible." Thomas does not smile. "I feel terrible." Margaret looks at the metal fragments on the desk. She does not ask what they are. She already knows. "You did the right thing, Thomas." Thomas picks up the artillery shell fragment, turning it over in his fingers. "She helped shoot down our planes. She transmitted coordinates that killed our pilots. And I saved her life. You saved a patient's life. That is what you do." Thomas shakes his head. "It is not that simple." "Yes, it is." Margaret's voice is firm. "You are a surgeon. Your job is to heal people, not to judge them, not to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die, just to heal them." Thomas looks at her for a long moment. Then he says something he has never said out loud before. "I let a man die once, a German prisoner. His name was Klaus. He had a bullet wound in his leg. It was not serious. I could have saved him easily. But I was tired, and I was angry, and I decided he was not worth the effort. So I put him at the end of the line, and he died of infection the next morning." Margaret does not look surprised. She has known about Klaus for almost a year. But hearing Thomas finally admit it out loud changes something between them. "I know," she says quietly. Thomas stares at her. "You knew I was there, Thomas. I saw you make that decision. I saw the look on your face when you found out he died. Then why did you never say anything? Because it was not my place to judge you. And because I knew that you were already judging yourself harder than anyone else ever could." Thomas sets down the fragment and puts his head in his hands. "I broke my promise to Daniel. The promise I made on the beach. Save the ones you can save, all of them, even the enemy. And the first chance I got, I let a German boy die because I was too angry to care." Margaret reaches across the desk and puts her hand on his arm. "That was then. This is now. You had a choice last night, and you made the right one. You cannot change what happened to Klaus, but you can choose not to let it happen again." Thomas looks up at her. "And what about when Whitmore comes back? What about when he finds out what she did? He will use her, Margaret. He will squeeze every drop of information out of her and then throw her away. Then we protect her. We give her time to heal, and we let her make her own choices about what to tell him. She is the enemy." Margaret shakes her head. "She is a patient. That is what you said last night. That is what you have to keep believing." Thomas does not answer, but something in his expression shifts, something that looks almost like hope. 2 hours later, Ingrid asks to speak with him. Thomas finds her sitting up in her cot, her bandaged arm cradled against her chest. The other prisoners are watching, but she does not seem to care. Her eyes are fixed on Thomas with an intensity that makes him uncomfortable. He pulls up a chair and sits down beside her bed. "The nurse said you wanted to see me." Ingrid nods. Her voice is weak but steady. "I know what you found in my wound." Thomas does not react. He has been preparing for this conversation since dawn. The radio fragment and the artillery shell. Ingrid's eyes never leave his face. "You know what I was. You know what I did. I know you were a radio operator for an anti-aircraft unit. I transmitted coordinates." Ingrid's voice cracks, but she forces herself to continue. "I sat in a bunker and read numbers into a microphone, and those numbers told the guns where to aim. I never saw the planes I helped shoot down. I never met the pilots who died. But I know they died because of me." Thomas says nothing. He lets her talk. "I joined the Luftwaffe because my father was dead and my family needed money. I did not believe in the war. I did not hate Americans. I just wanted to survive. But survival has a price, and I paid it with other people's lives." She looks down at her bandaged arm. "When you found me, I thought you would let me die. I thought you would look at my uniform and see an enemy. I thought I deserved whatever happened to me. Thomas finally speaks. But I did not let you die. Number. Ingrid looks up at him again. You saved me. You stayed up all night fighting an infection that should have killed me, and I do not understand why. Thomas is quiet for a long moment. Then he tells her something he has not told anyone except Margaret. I made a promise to my brother. He died on a beach in France almost a year ago. Before he died, he made me promise to save everyone I could, even the enemy. And for a long time, I broke that promise. I let my anger control me. I let hatred make decisions that should have been made by compassion. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. Last night, I had a choice. I could have looked at you and seen a German soldier who helped kill American pilots. I could have decided you were not worth saving. I could have let you die the way I let another German soldier die 8 months ago. Ingrid watches him, barely breathing. But I did not, because you are not a symbol or a statistic or a representation of the enemy. You are a 19-year-old girl who got caught up in a war she did not start and did things she will regret for the rest of her life. And that makes you exactly the same as every other patient I have ever treated. He stands up and looks down at her. I am not going to judge you for what you did during the war. I am not qualified to judge anyone. All I can do is try to heal you. That is my job. That is my promise. Ingrid stares at him for a long moment. Then she says something that changes everything. There is a man coming, an intelligence officer. He wants to interrogate me. Thomas nods. Major Whitmore, I know. He will ask me about the radio frequencies we used, the procedures for transmitting coordinates. Ingrid takes a deep breath. I am going to tell him everything. Thomas feels his stomach tighten. He did not expect this. Why? Because of what you just said. Ingrid's eyes are bright with something that might be tears. You saved me because you believed I deserved to live. You kept your promise to your brother. Now I have to decide what kind of person I want to be. She looks at her bandaged arm. I spent 3 years helping shoot down American planes. I cannot undo that, but I can choose what I do now. And if the information I have can save American lives, then maybe, just maybe, I can start to balance the scales. Thomas does not know what to say. He came into this conversation expecting to comfort a traumatized prisoner. Instead, he finds himself face to face with something he did not anticipate. Courage. Are you sure, he asks? Once you give Whitmore that information, you cannot take it back. You will be a collaborator in the eyes of your own people. Ingrid almost smiles. My own people are the ones who sent me to war when I was 17 years old. My own people are the ones who taught me that surrender was worse than death. My own people are the ones who are responsible for millions of deaths across Europe. She shakes her head. I do not owe them anything, but I owe you something. You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. The least I can do is try to save some lives in return. Major Harold Whitmore returns to the hospital that afternoon. He brings 2 military police officers and an interpreter this time. He walks into the prisoner ward like a man who expects resistance, his jaw set and his eyes hard, but he does not find resistance. He finds Ingrid Hoffman sitting up in her cot, waiting for him. Major Whitmore. Her English is halting but clear. I understand you have questions for me. Whitmore stops. This is not what he expected. He expected a frightened girl who would need to be pressured into cooperation. He expected tears and denial and the slow grinding process of extracting information from an unwilling source. He did not expect her to meet his eyes with something that looks almost like defiance. You are willing to talk. I am willing to make a deal. Whitmore's expression hardens. You are not in a position to make deals. Ingrid does not flinch. I have information about the radio frequencies used by German anti-aircraft units in this sector. I have information about the procedures for transmitting coordinates and the backup systems they use when primary communications are jammed. This information could help you protect American aircraft from enemy fire. Whitmore says nothing. He is listening. I will give you everything I know, but I have one condition. Whitmore almost laughs. You have a condition, yes. Ingrid's voice is steady. I will give you this information only if you promise that it will be used to protect American planes. Not to attack anti-aircraft positions where there might be civilians. Not to bomb cities or villages or refugee columns. Only to protect your own people. Whitmore stares at her for a long moment. Then he looks at Thomas, who is standing in the corner of the ward watching the exchange. Did you put her up to this? Thomas shakes his head. This is her choice. Whitmore turns back to Ingrid. His expression is unreadable. You understand that you are in no position to demand anything. You are a prisoner of war. I could have you transferred to an interrogation facility where the methods are much less pleasant than a conversation in a hospital ward. You could. Ingrid does not look away. But then you would get nothing. I am not afraid to die, Major. I have been ready to die for weeks. If you refuse my condition, I will simply stop talking. And when I die from this infection, which I very well might, you will have lost your chance. The room is silent. Thomas can hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Whitmore nods. Fine. I agree to your condition. The information will be used only to protect American aircraft. Now talk. For the next 2 hours, Ingrid tells Whitmore everything she knows. She describes the radio frequencies used by anti-aircraft units in Western Germany. She explains the call signs, the procedures for coordinating fire between multiple batteries. She draws diagrams of the command structure and describes the backup systems that activate when primary communications are jammed. Whitmore listens without interrupting. His interpreter takes notes in a small leather notebook. When Ingrid finally stops talking, Whitmore stands up and looks at her with an expression that Thomas cannot read. If this information is accurate, you may have just saved a lot of American lives. Ingrid does not respond. She looks exhausted, her face pale and her eyes hollow. Whitmore turns to leave, then pauses at the door. For what it is worth, I underestimated you. And perhaps I underestimated your doctor as well. He walks out without another word. 3 days later, a communications officer bursts into the hospital with news. The information Ingrid provided has been verified and put into action. American intelligence used her information to intercept a German transmission about a planned ambush on a convoy of B-17 bombers near Frankfurt. Because of the intercept, the convoy was rerouted. 47 aircraft, 470 crew members. Not a single plane was lost. Thomas finds Ingrid in the prisoner ward staring at the ceiling. She has heard the news. The other prisoners have been talking about it, some with admiration, some with contempt. He sits down beside her bed. You saved 470 people. Ingrid does not look at him. I do not want redemption. I do not deserve it. Then what do you want? Ingrid is quiet for a long moment. Then she answers, balance. Just a little balance. I help but kill people I never met. Now I help save people I will never meet. It does not erase what I did. Nothing will ever erase what I did. But it is something. Thomas nods. He understands. He understands better than she knows. The tension in the prisoner ward does not disappear after Ingrid's cooperation becomes known. If anything, it gets worse. Corporal Werner Dietrich has been watching Ingrid for days. He has seen the special treatment she receives from the American medical staff. He has seen the intelligence officers coming and going. He has heard the rumors about the information she provided. And he has decided that she is a traitor. One evening when the guards are distracted, Dietrich speaks loudly enough for everyone to hear. Look at her, the little collaborator. She sells out her country for clean bandages and American coffee. She is worse than the enemy. At least the Americans are honest about wanting to destroy us. Ingrid does not respond. She keeps her eyes on the ceiling. But Thomas hears the commotion from his office. He walks into the prisoner ward and stands in the center of the room looking at Dietrich with cold eyes. I am going to say this once and only once. He speaks slowly, letting the interpreter translate each sentence. I do not care what rank you held. I do not care what unit you served in. I do not care what you think about women in uniform or collaboration or anything else. In this hospital, every patient receives the same standard of care. If her wound is worse, she gets more attention. If your wound is worse, you get more attention. That is how medicine works. Dietrich glares at him but says nothing. Thomas continues. Anyone who causes problems in this ward will be transferred to a different facility. I do not think you want that, Corporal. I have heard that the facilities in France are much less comfortable than this one. He turns to leave. But before he reaches the door, Ingrid does something unexpected. She sits up, looks directly at Dietrich, and speaks in German. You think I wanted to be there? You think any of us wanted to be there? They sent us because you were all dead or captured, and there was no one left. The room goes silent. Dietrich stares at her, his face red with anger. But he does not respond. Ingrid lies back down and closes her eyes. Margaret, standing near the entrance, catches Thomas's eye and hides a small smile. The tension eases after that. Dietrich stops his open complaints. The other prisoners begin treating Ingrid as one of their own rather than an outsider. One of them, a young private named Fritz Bauer, even starts sharing his bread ration with her. Bauer is maybe 20 years old with a face too young for the war he has been fighting. He has shrapnel wounds in his chest from an American artillery barrage near the Rhine. He will survive, but he will carry the scars for the rest of his life. One evening he asks Ingrid where she is from. Stuttgart. Do you have family? Ingrid is quiet for a moment. My mother. But I do not know if she is still alive. Stuttgart was bombed heavily. Bauer nods slowly. My home was in Dresden. Ingrid looks at him. Dresden was firebombed in February 1945. The entire city center was destroyed. Tens of thousands of people died. I am sorry, she says quietly. Bauer shrugs. It is not your fault. It is not anyone's fault. It is war. War destroys everything it touches. He looks at the ceiling. All we can do now is survive. Survive and hope that someday this will all be over. And we can go home and start again. Ingrid does not answer, but something in her expression softens. In this place surrounded by wounded enemies and broken men, she has found something unexpected. Understanding. The letter arrives on Ingrid's last day in the hospital. It has been routed through the prisoner mail system, passed from camp to camp, taking weeks to reach her. The envelope is creased and dirty, the handwriting barely legible. But Ingrid recognizes it immediately. Eva. She tears open the envelope with trembling hands and reads, Dear Ingrid, I am writing this letter from a prisoner camp in France. I'm alive. When we were separated at the river crossing, I was captured by a French unit. They did not treat us well. But I survived. I have been worrying about you since we parted. Your wound looked terrible and I knew I did not bandage it properly. I am not a nurse. I just did what I could with what I had. If you are reading this letter, it means you are still alive. And if you are still alive, it means someone saved you. Remember that, Ingrid. Someone chose to save you. Do not waste it. I hope we will meet again someday when this war is finally over. Until then, stay strong, your friend Eva. Ingrid reads the letter twice. Then she folds it carefully and presses it against her chest. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, she cries. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. On Ingrid's last day in the hospital, Thomas comes to say goodbye. He checks her arm one final time, unwrapping the bandages and examining the scar. It is a thick, pinkish, white line running from her wrist to her mid-forearm, still tender but fully closed. He presses gently on the muscle, sticking her to flex her fingers, rotate her wrist, make a fist. She does all of it without wincing. You are going to be fine, he says. Ingrid looks at him. Then she asks the question she has been holding back for weeks. Why did you do this? I am the enemy. You could have let me die. Thomas looks at her for a long moment, and then he says something that will echo across decades. You are not my enemy. You are a patient. That is the only thing that matters in this room. Ingrid does not thank him. She does not need to. She just holds up her arm, the arm she thought she was going to lose, and looks at it like she is seeing it for the first time. Then she is escorted out of the hospital by two military police officers loaded onto a truck with other prisoners and driven west toward the transit camp. Margaret watches her go from the hospital entrance. She never sees Ingrid again. She never learns what happens to her after repatriation, but she thinks about her often, especially when she is changing bandages on other patients and they ask why she is being so careful. She thinks about Ingrid, and she remembers that sometimes the smallest act, the decision to treat a wound instead of ignoring it, is the thing that keeps someone alive. Thomas stands in his office looking at the two metal fragments on his desk. He should throw them away. They are just pieces of shrapnel, meaningless now that Ingrid is gone, but he cannot bring himself to do it. He picks up the artillery shell fragment, 1st Infantry Division, Daniel's division. He thinks about his brother, about the promise on the beach, about the long months of guilt and anger and self-hatred that followed. And he realizes something. Daniel was right. War is not about nations or ideologies or the grand sweep of history. War is about individuals. Individual soldiers fighting and dying. Individual doctors trying to save them. individual choices that ripple outward in ways no one can predict. Thomas chose to save Ingrid's life. And because of that choice, 470 American airmen are alive today. 470 men who will go home to their families, who will have children and grandchildren, who will live out their lives because a German girl decided to share what she knew. That is the legacy of one choice. One moment of compassion instead of hatred. Thomas puts the fragments in a small wooden box and closes the lid. He does not know what will happen to Ingrid. He does not know if she will survive the transit camps, if she will find her mother, if she will live to see the end of the war. But he knows one thing: he kept his promise. And that is enough. The war ends on May 8, 1945. In cities across Europe, people pour into the streets. They wave flags and embrace strangers and weep with relief. Church bells ring for the first time in years. Soldiers throw their helmets in the air and shout until their voices break. But in the prisoner camps and field hospitals and refugee columns that stretch across the shattered continent, the celebration is quieter. For the millions of displaced and wounded and broken, the end of the war is not a victory. It is simply the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. The nightmare of survival. The nightmare of going home to places that no longer exist. The nightmare of rebuilding lives from ashes and rubble and memory. Ingrid Hoffmann spends the summer of 1945 in a transit camp in eastern France. The camp is not comfortable. Canvas tents, limited food, no privacy, but it is safe. No bombs fall here. No artillery shells whistle overhead. No one orders her to transmit coordinates that will kill men she has never met. She sleeps, she eats, she waits, and she writes letters. She writes to her mother in Stuttgart, not knowing if the letters will arrive, not knowing if her mother is still alive to receive them. She writes about the hospital, about the American surgeon who saved her arm, about the choice she made to share information with the intelligence officer. She does not know if her mother will understand. She does not know if anyone will understand. But she writes anyway. Because putting words on paper is the only way she knows to make sense of what has happened to her. The Red Cross is working to track survivors and reunite families, but the system is overwhelmed. There are millions of displaced persons across Europe, millions of letters and inquiries and desperate searches for loved ones who may be dead or alive or somewhere in between. It takes 3 months for Ingrid to receive news. Her mother is alive. Their apartment in Stuttgart was destroyed in a bombing raid, but her mother had taken shelter with neighbors and survived. She is now living in a refugee camp in the American occupation zone, waiting to rebuild. When Ingrid reads this letter, she sits alone in a corner of her tent and cries for the 3rd time since leaving the hospital. The first time was for Eva. The second time was for the arm she almost lost. This time is for something simpler. Home. She still has a home to return to. September 1945. Ingrid is repatriated to Germany. She travels by train through a country that no longer resembles the one she left. Cities have become piles of rubble. Bridges have collapsed into rivers. Railroad tracks have been bombed and repaired and bombed again, creating a patchwork of functional and destroyed infrastructure. The train stops frequently, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. Ingrid sits by the window and watches the landscape pass, trying to recognize places she once knew. She cannot. Everything has changed. Everything has been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed again until nothing looks familiar anymore. When she finally arrives at the refugee camp where her mother is staying, it is late afternoon. The sun is setting behind rows of identical wooden barracks, casting long shadows across the muddy paths between buildings. Ingrid walks through the camp, asking directions, following pointing fingers and shouted instructions. Her heart is pounding. Her hands are shaking. She has not seen her mother in almost 2 years. And then she sees her. Helga Hoffmann is standing outside one of the barracks talking to another woman. She is 52 years old, but she looks older. Her hair has gone completely gray. Her face is lined with worry and exhaustion. Her clothes are worn and patched. But when she turns and sees Ingrid walking toward her, her face transforms. Ingrid. She runs, not walks. Runs. A 52-year-old woman sprinting across a muddy refugee camp like a girl, arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. Ingrid runs too, and when they collide, when her mother's arms wrap around her and squeeze so tight she can barely breathe, Ingrid feels something she thought she had lost forever. Safety. You are alive. Her mother is sobbing into her hair. You are alive. You are alive. Ingrid cannot speak. She just holds on. She holds on like she will never let go. That night in the cramped barracks room, her mother shares with three other families. Ingrid tells her everything. She tells her about the anti-aircraft unit, about the coordinates she transmitted, about the planes that fell from the sky because of numbers she spoke into a microphone. She tells her about the retreat, about Eva bandaging her wound, about walking for days through the forest with an infection spreading up her arm. She tells her about the American hospital, about Captain Thomas Callahan, about the surgery without anesthesia and the fever that almost killed her and the choice she made to share information with the intelligence officer. Her mother listens without interrupting. Her face is unreadable in the dim light of the oil lamp. When Ingrid finishes, there is a long silence. Then her mother speaks. You did what you had to do to survive. That is all any of us can do. Ingrid shakes her head. I helped kill people, mother, American pilots. I do not know how many. And then I helped the Americans intercept German communications. I am a traitor to both sides. Her mother takes her hand. You are not a traitor. You are a survivor. There is a difference. She squeezes Ingrid's fingers. The men who started this war, the men who sent children to fight and die for their ambitions, they are the traitors. You were just trying to stay alive. And when you had a chance to do something good, you took it. That is not betrayal. That is redemption. Ingrid wants to believe her. She wants to believe that what she did matters, that the lives she helped save somehow balance the lives she helped take. But she is not sure she will ever believe it completely. Some debts cannot be repaid. Some scales cannot be balanced. All she can do is keep living, keep trying, keep hoping that someday the weight on her shoulders will feel a little lighter. Captain Thomas Callahan returns to the United States in December 1945. The ship docks in New York Harbor on a gray winter morning. Thousands of soldiers crowd the decks cheering and waving as the Statue of Liberty comes into view. Bands play on the pier. Families hold up signs with names and messages of welcome. Thomas stands apart from the celebration. He watches the harbor approach with quiet eyes, thinking about everyone who will not be coming home. Daniel, Klaus, the hundreds of patients he could not save despite everything he tried. And Ingrid, the German girl whose arm he saved, the enemy who became a patient, who became something he cannot quite name. He does not know what happened to her. He does not know if she survived the transit camps, if she found her mother, if she made it home. The military does not track the fates of individual prisoners. Once they leave your care, they disappear into the vast machinery of repatriation and reconstruction. Thomas hopes she made it. He hopes she is somewhere in Germany right now, rebuilding her life using the arm he saved to hold her mother and write letters and do all the ordinary things that make a life worth living. But he will probably never know for certain. He disembarks with the other soldiers and makes his way through the crowded pier. No one is waiting for him. His parents died before the war. His brother died on Omaha Beach. He has no wife, no children, no one to welcome him home. He takes a train to Pennsylvania. He finds an apartment in Scranton. He resumes his practice as a civilian surgeon, treating appendicitis and hernias and broken bones instead of shrapnel wounds and amputations. And he tries to forget. He tries to forget the beaches and the hospitals and the endless parade of dying men. He tries to forget the smell of infected tissue and the sound of bone saws and the weight of decisions that meant life or death for people he barely knew. He tries to forget Klaus, the boy he let die because he was too tired and too angry to care. But he cannot forget Ingrid. He cannot forget the girl who woke up from a fever and chose to tell the truth about what she had done. The girl who traded her secrets for a chance to save lives. The girl who taught him that enemies are just people on the other side of a line someone else drew. He keeps the two metal fragments in a wooden box on his desk, the artillery shell, the radio component. He does not look at them often, but he knows they are there, reminders of the promise he almost broke, and the promise he finally kept. The years pass. Thomas marries in 1948. Her name is Catherine, a nurse he meets at the hospital where he works. She is kind and patient, and she does not ask too many questions about the war. They have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The oldest boy becomes a lawyer. The younger boy becomes an engineer. The girl Catherine becomes a surgeon like her father. Thomas is proud of all of them, but he is especially proud of Catherine. She has his hands steady and precise. She has his temperament calm under pressure. And she has something he never had: the ability to see patients as people without the weight of a war hanging over every decision. He teaches her everything he knows. He tells her about the importance of discipline, of treating every patient with the same standard of care, regardless of who they are or where they come from. He tells her about the Geneva Convention and medical ethics and the oath they both swore to do no harm. But he never tells her about Klaus. He never tells her about the promise he made to Daniel or the promise he broke in France. He never tells her about Ingrid. Some stories are too heavy to share. Some lessons can only be learned by living them. Thomas Callahan dies in his sleep on March 15, 1987. He is 76 years old. He is surrounded by his wife, his 3 children, and his 7 grandchildren. His obituary mentions his service in World War II. It mentions his 40-year career as a surgeon. It mentions his wife and children and the community he served. It does not mention Klaus. It does not mention Daniel. It does not mention a German girl in a field hospital whose arm he saved one night in April 1945. Some stories are never written down. They live only in the hearts of the people who experience them. And when those people die, the stories die with them, unless someone finds a way to bring them back. November 9th, 1989. The Berlin Wall falls. Across Germany, millions of people pour into the streets. They climb the wall with hammers and chisels. They embrace strangers from the other side. They weep and laugh and dance on the rubble of a barrier that divided their country for 28 years. In Munich, a 63-year-old woman named Ingrid Brenner watches the news coverage on television. She has lived in Munich since 1952, when she married a mechanical engineer named Hans Brenner. They raised 2 children together, a son who became a doctor, a daughter who became a teacher just like Ingrid's father. Ingrid herself became a nurse. She spent 35 years caring for patients in a Munich hospital, treating Germans and Americans, in Turks, in Poles, and everyone else who came through her doors. She never forgot what Captain Callahan taught her. A patient is a patient. That is the only thing that matters. Now, watching the wall come down, she thinks about something she has been putting off for 44 years: the letter. She wrote it in 1945, just after leaving the American Field Hospital. A letter thanking Captain Callahan for saving her arm and her life. A letter explaining what his words meant to her, how they changed the way she saw the world. But she never sent it. At first she was ashamed. She was a German soldier who had helped kill American pilots. What right did she have to write to an American doctor and expect him to care? Then as the years passed, it seemed too late. Too much time had gone by. He had probably forgotten her. She was just one patient among thousands, one face in an endless parade of wounded and dying. And part of her was afraid. Afraid that he would not want to hear from her. Afraid that the connection she felt was one-sided, a product of her own desperation rather than any real bond between them. So she kept the letter in a drawer. She read it sometimes on anniversaries and quiet evenings, but she never sent it. Now, watching the wall fall, she makes a decision. It is time. The next morning, Ingrid goes to the American embassy in Berlin. The city is chaos. People are still celebrating in the streets. Traffic is impossible. The embassy itself is crowded with Germans seeking visas and Americans trying to reach family members on the other side. But Ingrid waits. She waits for 3 hours, standing in line with her letter in her hand, until finally she reaches the front desk. She explains what she wants. She wants to send this letter to a man named Captain Thomas Callahan, a surgeon from Pennsylvania who served in World War II. She does not have his address. She does not know if he is still alive. But she has been waiting 44 years to thank him, and she is not going to wait any longer. The embassy official looks at her with tired eyes. He has been dealing with chaos all day, but something in Ingrid's expression stops him from dismissing her. He takes the letter. He promises to do what he can. Ingrid walks out of the embassy into the cold November air. She does not know if the letter will ever reach its destination. She does not know if Thomas Callahan is still alive to receive it. But she has done what she needed to do. She has finally said thank you. Now all she can do is wait. The letter arrives in Scranton, Pennsylvania in March 1990. It does not reach Thomas Callahan. He died 3 years earlier peacefully in his sleep, but it reaches his daughter. Dr. Catherine Callahan Mitchell is 40 years old, a surgeon like her father. She lives in Philadelphia now with a husband and 2 children of her own. When she receives the forwarded letter from the embassy, she does not know what to expect. The envelope is foreign. The handwriting is unfamiliar. The return address is in Munich, Germany. She opens it and reads, "Dear Captain Callahan, you do not know me, but you saved my life in April 1945 at a field hospital near Kassel, Germany. I was the girl with the infected arm. I was a prisoner of war, a radio operator for the Luftwaffe. You had every reason to let me die, but you did not. You told me something I have never forgotten. You said you are not my enemy, you are a patient. That is the only thing that matters in this room." I have carried those words with me for 44 years. They changed the way I see the world. They changed the kind of person I became. After the war, I became a nurse. I spent 35 years caring for patients, Germans and Americans and everyone else. Because you taught me that patients are just patients. There are no enemies in a hospital room. I have 2 children. One is a doctor in Munich. One is a teacher in Hamburg. They know my story. They know about you. I am writing this letter not just to thank you, though I thank you every day. I am writing to tell you that what you did was not wasted. It multiplied. It is still multiplying. With deepest gratitude, Ingrid Brenner, formerly Ingrid Hoffman. Catherine reads the letter twice. Then she sits down at her kitchen table and cries. She cries because she finally understands why her father never talked about the war. Not because he wanted to forget, but because some things are too important for words. She cries because she finally knows that her father kept his promises, whatever they were, whoever he made them to. And she cries because she wishes more than anything that he could have read this letter himself. She writes back to Ingrid that same week. She tells her that her father died in 1987. She tells her that the letter arrived too late for him to read, but not too late for his family to understand. She tells her that Thomas Callahan kept a wooden box on his desk for 40 years. Inside the box were 2 metal fragments, an artillery shell and a piece of radio equipment. She never knew what they meant. Now she does. The correspondence between Catherine and Ingrid continues for years. They exchange letters at first, then emails when Ingrid's grandchildren teach her how to use a computer. They share photographs of their families. They share stories about their fathers and their children and the strange winding paths that brought them to this moment. They never meet in person. Ingrid is too old to travel. Catherine is too busy with her practice and her family. But they become friends across an ocean and a generation connected by a choice that a surgeon made in a field hospital. 50 years ago, Ingrid dies in 2003 at the age of 77. She dies in her home in Munich, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her son, Dr. Marcus Brenner, holds her hand as she takes her last breath. Catherine learns of her death through an email from Marcus. She cries again, and she makes a promise to herself. She will make sure this story is not forgotten. June 2019, Vienna, Austria. An international medical conference fills the convention center with thousands of doctors from around the world. They are here to share research, learn new techniques, and connect with colleagues across borders and specialties. Among them is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, 35 years old, an orthopedic surgeon from Philadelphia. She is the granddaughter of Thomas Callahan and the daughter of Catherine Mitchell. Also among them is Dr. Anna Brenner, 38 years old, a general surgeon from Munich. She is the granddaughter of Ingrid Hoffman Brenner. They meet by accident at a coffee table during a break between sessions. The conversation starts casually. Where are you from? What is your specialty? Which hospital do you work at? Then Anna mentions her grandmother. She was a nurse for 35 years. She always said she became a nurse because an American doctor saved her life during World War II. She had a scar on her arm from a shrapnel wound. The doctor saved her arm when everyone else would have amputated. Sarah stops. Her coffee cup freezes halfway to her lips. What did you say? Anna looks at her curiously. My grandmother, Ingrid Brenner. She was wounded during the war and an American surgeon saved her arm. She wrote him a letter in 1989 after the wall fell, but he had already died. Sarah sets down her cup. Her hands are trembling. What was the surgeon's name? Captain Thomas Callahan, from Pennsylvania. Anna tilts her head. Why do you ask? Sarah cannot speak for a moment. When she finally finds her voice, it comes out as a whisper. Thomas Callahan was my grandfather. The 2 women stare at each other. 74 years, 2 continents, 3 generations. And here they are, drinking coffee together in Vienna. Anna covers her mouth with her hand. Her eyes are filling with tears. Your grandfather saved my grandmother's life. Sarah nods. She is crying too. And your grandmother wrote a letter that my mother kept until the day she died. She read it to me when I was a little girl. She said it was the most important letter she ever received. They embrace. Two strangers who are not strangers at all. Two women connected by a choice that a surgeon made in a field hospital 74 years ago. When they finally pull apart, Anna says something that Sarah will remember for the rest of her life. My grandmother used to say that your grandfather gave her more than her arm. He gave her a second chance. And she spent the rest of her life trying to pay it forward. Sarah wipes her eyes. My grandfather never talked about the war, but my mother said he kept two metal fragments in a wooden box on his desk. She did not know what they meant until your grandmother's letter arrived. Anna nods. My grandmother told me about those fragments. One from an American shell, one from a German radio. She said they were proof that enemies can become patients, and patience can become family. Sarah looks at this woman she has just met who shares no blood with her, who comes from a different country and a different culture and a different history, and yet they are connected. They are family, because 74 years ago, a surgeon made a choice. And that choice rippled outward through generations, through decades, through the vast sweep of history until it brought two women to a coffee table in Vienna. That is the power of a single decision. That is the legacy of one moment of compassion instead of hatred. After the conference, Anna takes Sarah to Munich to meet her family. Ingrid is long dead, but her memory lives on in the family home, in the photographs on the walls, in the stories that her children and grandchildren tell. Sarah meets Marcus, Ingrid's son, now 70 years old. She meets Ingrid's other grandchildren, cousins she never knew she had. She sees the letter that her grandfather never got to read, preserved in a frame on the living room wall, and she sees the scar, not on Ingrid's arm. Ingrid is gone, but in a photograph taken in 1950 showing a young woman in a nurse's uniform holding up her left arm to show a thick pinkish white line running from her wrist to her mid-forearm. The arm that Thomas Callahan saved, the arm that Ingrid used for 35 years to care for patients of her own. Sarah stands in front of that photograph for a long time. She thinks about her grandfather, the surgeon who never talked about the war. She thinks about Ingrid, the enemy, who became a patient, who became a nurse. She thinks about all the lives that were touched by one decision, one moment, one choice. And she understands something that she never understood before. Legacy is not about monuments or medals or the grand sweep of history. Legacy is about the small choices we make every day. The choice to help instead of harm. The choice to see a person instead of an enemy. The choice to keep a promise even when it would be easier to break it. Thomas Callahan made that choice in a field hospital in April 1945. And because of that choice, Sarah is standing here now in Munich, surrounded by family she never knew she had. That is his legacy. Not the surgeries he performed or the medals he earned or the obituary that was written when he died. His legacy is the lives he saved and the lives those lives saved. And the lives those lives saved, rippling outward through generations until they reach this moment, this room, this photograph of a young woman holding up her arm. A patient is a patient. That is the only thing that matters. Those words spoken in a field hospital 74 years ago have become a truth that spans continents and generations, and they will continue to echo. Long after everyone who was there is gone, long after the hospitals have crumbled and the records have faded and the names have been forgotten. Because some truths are bigger than the people who speak them. Some choices create ripples that never stop spreading. Thomas Callahan did not know on that night in April 1945 that he was creating a legacy. He did not know that the girl whose arm he saved would become a nurse who would save other lives. He did not know that his granddaughter would someday stand in a living room in Munich, looking at a photograph of a scar and understanding finally what it means to keep a promise. He just did his job. He just treated a patient. He just made a choice. But that choice, that single choice, that moment of compassion instead of hatred, changed everything. It changed Ingrid's life. It changed her children's lives. It changed the lives of every patient she ever treated, every family she ever comforted, every person who was touched by the kindness she learned in an American field hospital. And it changed Thomas's life. It gave him redemption. It gave him peace. It gave him the knowledge that he had kept his promise to his brother, even when keeping that promise was the hardest thing he ever did. That is the story, not because it ended well, but because it almost did not. And the difference between those two outcomes was a surgeon who said 7 words that will echo through eternity. You are not my enemy. You are a patient. Sarah returns to Philadelphia with photographs and stories and a connection to a family she never knew existed. She tells her mother about Vienna, about Anna, about the living room in Munich, and the photograph of the scar and the letter that changed everything. Catherine listens. And when Sarah finishes, she takes out the wooden box that her father kept on his desk for 40 years. She opens it and shows Sarah the 2 metal fragments inside. Tarnished now, corroded by time, but still recognizable. I want you to have these, Catherine says. They belong to you now. They belong to the next generation. Sarah takes the box. She holds it in her hands and feels the weight of history. What am I supposed to do with them? Catherine smiles. Remember, that is all any of us can do. Remember what they mean. Remember the choice your grandfather made. And when you have the chance to make the same choice, remember that enemies are just patients on the other side of a line someone else drew. Sarah nods. She understands. She is a surgeon, like her grandfather. She has taken the same oath he took. She has made the same promises he made. And now she carries his legacy, not just in her blood, not just in her training, but in a small wooden box that contains 2 pieces of metal and a story that spans 74 years. A story about a promise, a story about a choice, a story about a surgeon who looked at an enemy and saw a patient. That is the legacy of Thomas Callahan. That is the legacy of Ingrid Hoffman. That is the legacy of one moment of compassion in a world at war. And it will continue, long after the last person who remembers them is gone, long after the metal fragments have rusted to dust and the photographs have faded to nothing. Because some stories are bigger than the people who live them. Some choices create ripples that never stop spreading. Some legacies are not written in books or carved in stone. They are carried in the hearts of the people who come after, passed down from generation to generation, kept alive by the simple act of remembering. This is that story. This is that legacy. This is the truth that Thomas Callahan spoke in a field hospital in April 1945, a truth that his granddaughter carries with her, now a truth that will outlast them all. You are not my enemy. You are a patient. That is the only thing that matters.